It's really great to have all of you here today for this final 2020 edition of the Universal COVID Ops webinar and meetup. And a special welcome back to all of our returning guests. I'm looking through the participants that are joining. A lot of names I recognize. Some of you have been with us for all 5 programs we've had since we started in September. It's really nice to see those familiar names rejoining. Thank you. And we've gotten such great feedback from this series, so please do keep the suggestions coming. I'm already planning what we can bring you in 2021, so don't be shy about sharing that. I'll tell you how by the time we get to the end of the program today. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Anabel Monson. I'm your host and moderator. So let's go ahead and get moving. Let me introduce you to our topics for today. We're going to start, as always, with an update on what's new from the field, hot topics and trends in global ops. I also have with us a special guest from our trip support services to cover key best practices that all operators need to keep in mind, even beyond current COVID restrictions. We'll do a preview on Brexit and what it will mean to operators, and one more seasonal destination as well to highlight for you, sunny Puerto Rico. We'll wrap up with your questions. And again, this is your last chance to hear from our experts until we get to January, so get those questions in anytime in the chat. It is a lot of ground to cover, so I suggest we dive in. Let me introduce you to our experts. Christine Vamvakas, Senior Account Manager, Charter Management, is one of the key experts that brings all of those incredible COVID details to you each week in those updates. Robert Moya, Senior Operations Manager with Trip Support Division. Jason Hayward joining us from the UK. He's General Manager of our Universal Aviation London Stansted office. And finally, Linda Matienzo with Airport Aviation Service, a Universal Aviation Certified member in Puerto Rico. So good to have you all with us, but we're going to start with Christine, as always. Christine, what's the news to share regarding global ops?
So usually I do an around the world update on the COVID restrictions. However, over the past week or so, we've seen that regulations have remained fairly stable. There are a few exceptions. Oman, for example, is now reissuing tourist visas. And on the other hand, we have Italy that is tightening down on the restrictions due to COVID numbers. Now, we may see more restrictions coming about if COVID numbers in those appropriate countries are increasing. And if that does happen, we will keep you updated. But for today, we wanted to focus on giving you guys the opportunity to look at best practices in both operating in COVID environment in the midst of the winter holiday season. So I will give my colleague, Robert Moya, the opportunity to do so.
All right, thanks so much, Christine. And thanks so much, Christine and Anabel, and thank you everyone for joining our call today. I'm going to break this section up into a couple of key points. More of a start, stop, continue approach to best practices during this holiday season. If you haven't started already, having those holiday planning discussions with your passengers will be a good start. Ask them, where they'd like to go and who they'd like to accompany them to ensure that we could get you all the requirements for each of those locations, as well as any implications that the different nationalities might have on your mission. Once you have your game plan, get and stay informed on the destinations you're planning on operating to. Not only the requirements to enter the country, but also the local requirements for whenever you're in country. We're still seeing a lot of curfews, a lot of restrictions based on the day and location. Additionally, source a local PCR testing center near you, near your home base or your home away from home. Ensure that you have a resource on getting those last minute PCR tests taken care of for you and your passengers. This is very important as it's one of the more standard requirements that most countries are requiring for entry into their country. Additionally, start to consider updating your health insurance for locations you intend to visit. More and more countries are requiring the need to have their specific location, their specific country added to your health insurance. So give that some thought.
Robert, what you mentioned, what in particular operators should stop doing right now?
Yes, believe it or not, there's some things you should stop doing. I know it's hard in this environment, but stop focusing solely on COVID, although very important to consider for your missions, there are other big items that we should remain focused on as well. Those are the basic building blocks of your mission, to include permit requirements, entry requirements, passports and visas. In regards to permits, we are seeing that the airport authorities and the civil aviations of the world, they're also dealing with these limited hours, with these curfews. So they may not be in the office as much as they were in the past. So the more lead time you can provide, either yourselves or your service provider, the better. And in regards to passports, we're seeing passport turnaround times being north of 6 months to renew. I know it's been a little while since most of us have traveled on a consistent basis, that now is a good time to, if you're within a year or so of renewing your passport, please get that process started today to avoid any delays. The same goes for visas. There are a number of countries that have either rescinded or reduced the validity of their visas. So once you have a game plan of where you're going, be sure that visas is on your pre-planning checklist.
Great. And Robert, what's that final set of best practices you wanted to share?
Awesome. Some really important best practices to continue, and to actually applaud the audience here for doing such a great job since the onset of this pandemic, is continue to maintain your travel logs for both the crew and the passengers. And that travel log should include anywhere they've been over the past 14 days, country-wise. Provide as much lead time as possible to plan your mission. That'll allow you to identify any red flags that may be out of the ordinary that has been brought on by this COVID challenge that we've been facing as a global community. Stay flexible. Everyone on this call is known that once you get that green light to go somewhere, you're almost at location, and things change. So stay flexible. Keep your passengers informed and educated that although what you can do today, you might not be able to do tomorrow. So stay flexible and continue practicing patience. All the airports that you're going to, or that you're intending on going to, they want and absolutely need your business, and not just the airports, but the local city, state, and country levels. They want and need your business, but they're dealing with the same challenges and restrictions that we are. So keep practicing patience, a little empathy, and with all these best practices combined with your understanding, we'll have a successful mission.
Great. Thanks, Robert. Good advice and good
Thanks,
reminders. All right, so I am going to hand off now to Jason Hayward. That brings us to those insights he's going to share with us on a very important new topic, Brexit, and how it's impacting private aviation starting in January 2021. So, Jason, what's the latest on Brexit, and what can operators expect?
Well, that's actually a really good question, because the truth is nobody knows. As we're speaking, Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, is heading to Brussels for talks with Ursula von der Leyen, who's the EC president at the moment, because they've come to a bit of an impasse. They're stuck on some important topics such as fishing quotas, level playing fields. And the big problem is, you might think, well, that doesn't affect my aircraft and how I operate through the UK and Europe, but it has a profound effect if we do not get a deal, because as they have been saying from the get-go, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So if the UK leaves the EU in the end of this month without a deal, then there's going to be some profound impacts on the operational environment through here in the UK.
And specifically, impacts to air routing, will there be changes you already know about?
We actually don't think there'll be too much change when it comes to routings, because there are open sky agreements already that exist, because actually each individual EU country manages its own airspace. And so flight planning for the UK will continue to run through CFMU based in Brussels. So we don't expect to see any impacts there because of how the EU manages its airspace.
All right, and what about aircraft importation?
Actually, that is one of the big challenges that may happen, because the UK was chosen by hundreds of operators over the years as the country to import your aircraft into the EU. And that was because aircraft over 8.5 metric tons were zero rated for VAT. So you could bring your aircraft to the UK, do the administrative process that your lawyers took, and the aircraft was imported, and you then had free circulation. If there's a no deal, it could be the case that those importations will not be grandfathered, and so you may find your aircraft is no longer eligible for free circulation around Europe, which will have a big impact on your aircraft and how you operate it. And of course, you'll need to re-import your aircraft into the EU if that is something that you need to have for your operation.
All right, so definitely a detail to keep in mind. What about charter permits?
Charter permits, again, could see profound changes. Certainly, we talk a lot to the UK CAA, and they are hoping for reciprocity for UK operators operating in Europe, but that will only come about if, for instance, the French will allow UK operators to fly within France. It's important to note that the EU does not have a central pool for managing access into Europe. Each country is responsible for managing the airspace and how aircraft operate through there. So it's certainly the case that that's what the UK are hoping for. They have already issued EASA registered charter operators with 3-month blanket permits, which start on the 1st of January, and with the hope that that will then become extended. If countries such as France, Germany, and Italy do not give that same access to UK operators, the UK will be prepared and will terminate those permits, and operators would need to apply for a separate charter permit to operate through the UK. The other impacts will be the UK would not approve cabotage routes. So if you are, for instance, a German-based charter operator and you want to fly some passengers from Edinburgh to London, you would not get that permit. It would not be approved. You could get a permit in to the UK and you could get a permit out, but you wouldn't get those cabotage rights. So there's a lot hanging on fish quotas at the moment.
Things you wouldn't expect. What about pilot or engineering licenses?
Again, that's going to be something that operators will have to bear in mind if they have got British-based pilots on an EASA pilot's license. Those pilots will be getting UK CAA issued licenses, but if they need to fly on a mixed fleet that is, say, registered in the UK, and also their company has German registered aircraft, they would also need to apply for a dual EASA license as well. The same goes for engineers as well. So if you're a UK based engineer, you will be ported over to a UK CAA issued UK engineering license. You might not necessarily be able to work then on EASA registered aircraft again. So there's another profound impact. That will also extend to aircraft parts being shipped over from the EU to the UK and fitted on UK registered aircraft, because again, at the moment, there's no guarantee that the UK will continue to recognize EASA standards, or that EASA will continue to recognize UK standards.
All right, and then moving into customs.
Customs, we're not expecting too much in the way of impact from an immigration at the border, but where you can perhaps foresee issues are if you are, for instance, you have bought your Dassault to London, which then goes AOG, and you need a part shipped from Dassault in France. If we have a hard Brexit and that there's no deal, there's going to be delays at the border, plus you will also face importation duties as well. So there can be extra red tape to get your part and extra costs with importation duties that will have to be paid. The same if you need to ship a part back to mainland Europe as well, you'd have the same problem going the opposite way. So aircraft parts can be a potential source of issue as well.
Correct. Well, and I guess finally too, let's talk about immigration and pet travel.
Well, as already mentioned, we don't anticipate too many problems at the border. We speak a lot with the Home Office. We really don't think there'll be too much in the way of changes. Pet travel, on the other hand, is going to be a bit of a shaggy dog story in that DEFRA, the UK government body that oversees the pet transportation process, are looking at 21 different options. We're recommending that people that are bringing their pets to the UK get a British passport for their pets to actually smooth away any issues that may come about if the UK no longer recognizes EU pet passports or EU vet certificates, health certificates.
All right, so something tells me, Jason, we're probably going to have you back after some of these questions get resolved so we can get a little more information out of you. So do be prepared. Look forward to having you again. But let's go ahead and conclude, thank you, Jason, with Linda from Puerto Rico. So welcome, Linda, bienvenidos. So good to have you with us. Can you start us off by sharing a little bit about those top leisure destinations and regions within Puerto Rico? What is it like right now at the resorts, the tourist areas, including those private zones with villas and other residences available?
Puerto Rico has, like every other country, their restrictions and the protocol to follow. Right now, the resorts, the villas, hotels are fully operating with no restriction on occupancy. The tourist zone to visit, of course, Old San Juan, walking the street of Old San Juan with the lovely colonial architecture and imposing fort. The main attraction is a Morro. Another big attraction that we have to offer for our visitors is El Yunque. It's a national forest. It's the home to the only tropical rainforest in the national U.S. Forest system. They also can visit Culebra, which is an island 17 miles east of Puerto Rico, which has one of the most famous beautiful beach called Flamenco. It's very popular for tourists and locals. We also have Vieque, it's another island, very popular also because of the beaches, restaurants, galleries. Also on the west side of San Juan, Puerto Rico, we have Rincon, which is famous for surfers and whale watching.
So at all those locations, you mentioned that hotels and resorts are at full occupancy capacity. They can operate fully. What about capacity in the restaurants and in the tourist areas? Are there restrictions?
There's some restriction after we have the latest executive order, which began on December the 7th through January 7th. The restrictions of operating restaurant, shopping malls, stores are at 30% capacity.
Good. And any curfews to be aware of?
Curfew, they'll begin at 9 o'clock at night until 5 o'clock in the morning. On Sundays, we have a lockdown. That's Sundays only.
Okay.
So the only stores that is open on Sunday is drugstore, supermarket, gas stations, any emergency, but that's about it. Everybody has to stay home and safe.
All right, and good to keep in mind. So speaking of those health and safety protocols, I remember from us talking about this earlier, it sounded like it was all the usual things that we're accustomed to in addition to the reduction in capacity, wearing masks and social distancing.
Every stores, every shopping mall, hotel, they have their own protocol, bodies as temperature, make sure the social distance is kept. They have hand sanitizer just to keep the safety of course, employees and guests.
All right, so good to keep in mind. Now, turning to operational considerations, how have the procedures for arrival and departure into Puerto Rico changed from before COVID-19? Can you share specifics about health screenings, testing requirements, any contact tracing that needs to take place?
Sure. Testing, they recommend that every passenger that arrives in Puerto Rico, it's recommended to bring a negative COVID test. It's not mandatory, but it's recommended. They have to fill out travel safe, it's online, and they have to present it. We have the National Guard meeting every flight that arrives in Puerto Rico with passengers. In case the passenger doesn't have the travel safe online fill out, they help them out just to complete all the questionnaire. And let's say that if we have a passenger that have some symptoms, then the National Guard with the health department will take care of them. They assist them with all the necessities that they need. Of course, they're going to put in quarantine.
Exactly. So it will, of course, depend on the results of that questionnaire. All right. So good to know. So thank you, Linda. Excellent overview. And I know we're all planning our next trip to Puerto Rico anytime now.
I'm going to be waiting for you guys.
Perfect. Well, we will take you up on that. All right. So thanks again. We're going to move on to the questions that came in from our audience. Checking our time, we are definitely going to be running a little over our goal of about half an hour. So I hope you can join us because we've got some really good questions. I can see from the chat that there's activity there. So I want to get to those. But we are going to prioritize the questions that came in advance to thank you for everyone who did so. So again, if you're still waiting to craft your perfect question, please drop it into chat now. We will stay online and answering questions as long as you are still with us. So please do plan to join us if you can. If you cannot, this is recorded. We'll send it out to you in the link on Thursday. I'm actually going to start you off with a really brief poll. We had an interesting inquiry from one of our clients about how many flight departments are hold on a second. I need to get my poll up here. One moment. It's a lot super helpful when I can find it. All right, there we go. I want to share a poll with you about positioning crew. So I'm going to launch this for you. And so it's, as a flight department, are you using your own aircraft to position crew, or are you using commercial airlines? Just an interesting inquiry. So if you can take a second, I'm just going to leave this up very briefly for about, say, 15 more seconds and let everyone drop in an answer. So it does look like by far many of you are still using commercial airlines to position or reposition crew. So good information to share. Thank you. And thank you for that question. So let me get that off of our screen and we can continue. So I'm going to move now to the questions that you sent us in advance. So Christine, are you ready? These are going to come mostly to you, I believe, but I know we've got a couple, it looks like, that are going to go to some of our other experts. All right. Oop, hang on a second. Here we go. First one is about this big event. We had a customer ask, they heard that the Davos World Economic Forum was moving to Singapore. Do you have any details to share?
So they just announced on the 7th of December that for the first time, it's going to move from Davos to Singapore, only for 2021. So normally it takes place at the latter part of January. However, it's been pushed to May. This, like I said, the update was just made on the 7th of December. So we reached out to Civil Aviation in Singapore. No information is quite known yet as far as what the procedures will be or the requirements. But as soon as those are announced, we will let you know for sure.
Great. All right. So also for you, does the CDC's new change timeline for quarantine after COVID exposure change anything in regard to U.S. entry requirements right now?
So though the CDC has announced a reduction from 14 to 10 days, those are just the recommendations that they have. It doesn't alter the regulatory aspect of entering the US. So people need to adhere to that entry requirement, specifically the US proclamation, if you're a non-US citizen. And then outside of that, you need to adhere to the local state that you are coming into.
Great. Now, another one about regional travel, or excuse me, seasonal travel. We've heard that ski country in the U.S. has now issued new restrictions. What are those and whom does it impact?
So specifically, this is going to be for Pitkin. It covers Pitkin, Eagle, and Garfield. Effectively, they're saying that December 14th, all persons that are looking to travel into these counties, the ski country, if they're looking to stay 1 day or more, they're going to have to complete a travel affidavit. They will also need to do a COVID test 72 hours prior to arrival. If you don't meet those requirements, you will have to quarantine for 10 days. The only persons that are exempt from getting that COVID test is persons 10 years or younger.
All right. So definitely something to plan for. Now, regarding tech stops and entry into the U.S., the U.S. continues to view tech stops from restricted countries into restricted countries carrying non-US residents or citizens on board as problematic. Any advice you can give for those circumstances?
So unfortunately, the US proclamation is very clear. Any persons that actually come from a suspended region in the preceding 14 days and does not have something like a green card, is not married to a US national, doesn't have a national interest waiver, will not be permitted in. A tech stop in and of itself, even though it may be for fuel only and persons may not be getting off the aircraft, it is considered a stop, and therefore those persons would not be permitted entry.
Got it. All right, now shifting gears, talking about another major event. Any updates on the Olympics?
So last year, when this whole situation with the pandemic started, the Olympic Committee had, of course, delayed the event. They had originally slanted it, just put a slotted time frame in for 2021 from July 23rd to August 8th, if I'm not mistaken. However, outside of those announcements, nothing more has come. We are seeking for more updates eventually from Civil Aviation and all the other entities within Japan through our Universal office out there. And once we have more data, we will definitely update everyone.
Great. So we'll keep an eye out on that. What is the current restriction on U.S. crews going into China, and what are the current restrictions entering Korea? Specifically, they're asking, is it possible to land in Shanghai, drop passengers, and then reposition to Seoul?
So doing a reposition in Seoul as a relief crew, as the arrival crew, of course, that's not an issue for coming in for crew rest with the appropriate arrangements. However, the issue really lies in China. At the end of November, civil aviation authorities announced verbally, they have yet to put this in writing, that aircraft that are looking to come into the country with passengers on board, regardless if they're Chinese nationals or foreign, the process that they had in place with the local CDC approval is no longer valid. So this means that persons would need to get an approval from the Foreign Affairs Office, State Council, or something along those lines at much higher levels, and only then would they approve a flight to come in. So right now, it's not possible. If it does become possible again, I do foresee, at least until things change, that for any crew coming in, it would remain as, again, if it's approved, it's a drop and go. They would not let you overnight.
Got it. All right, now switching again, we're going back to seasonal destinations. What about access into Bora Bora?
So Bora Bora has a regulation, or it became that a couple of years ago, where if given enough notice, 15 minimum working days, you can apply to make it an airport of entry because it's normally not. However, due to COVID, Civil Aviation has revoked that requirement or that ability. So any persons looking to go to Bora Bora will first have to enter through the airport of entry, which is November Tango Alpha Alpha, clear customs, and then proceed over. The same would go for departing the country. Through Papeete back out. The one thing to consider is that Bora Bora is becoming a very popular destination for persons over the winter holiday season. So the availability of parking may become slim over the next couple of weeks.
All right, I know parking has been an issue for many locations. Now, again, staying with the seasonal theme, will St. Bart's accept a rapid COVID test?
So originally they wanted a COVID test to come in, and that had to be done about 3 days prior to arrival. Since then, they will accept a COVID test and they will accept an antigen test, not an antibody test. That's a very different thing. So you can now get a COVID test or an antigen test 3 days prior to arrival, and that would be accepted. The other good thing to note is that they recently also removed the requirement about getting another COVID test. The regulation stated that if you're staying there for 7 days or more, you would need to get one, and that's no longer required.
All right, and then also a request for the latest on Hawaii, and really they're saying all the islands, and the quote was, they are a constant moving target.
So this one is a bit of a tricky one. Originally, when the regulation came about, it stated that you get your COVID test 72 hours prior to your last departure point before entering one of the islands, fill out the online form, get approved, and then you would not have to quarantine. Since then, we've seen some deviation from that regulation. Case in point, Kauai, they have now stated that regardless of any COVID testing, they will require a 14-day quarantine. And then recently I spoke to Maui myself, who advised that authorities are becoming very strict with that 72 hours prior to your last departure point from entering Maui. They're saying that even if it's 72 and a half hours, that means that you're beyond that 72-hour time frame and you will be quarantined. So it's very important to look at those the time frames that you get that test done. And I would say also that you're going to want to look at every single flight going in there before making that determination on if it's a go or a no-go, simply because things are changing rapidly.
All right. And then finally, a inquiry about the Yucatan Peninsula. Any gotchas, things to avoid when traveling to that region?
So, of course, with the Yucatan Peninsula, it covers Mexico and, of course, Belize. So from Mexico, the regulations remain the same. Nothing has changed. You need a health questionnaire for arrival and departure. What people need to consider here is that they need to look at the alert system. They have the green, yellow, orange, and red. If it meets certain COVID numbers, they will change those signs and what those restrictions will be. So far in this region, things have been relatively stable, but they need to consider also that because it is that winter holiday season, parking can become an issue. I know it's not Yucatan related, but for Mike Sierra Delta, they recently announced that parking will not be advised until 48 hours prior to arrival, though you may have requested in advance. That just shows how much interest is for these destinations. Now, Belize, on the other hand, you can travel there as long as you have a COVID test, 72 hours prior departure. You have to fill out a form. You have to stay at a Golden Star hotel. You can do tourism as long as it is on that Golden Star list. And people also need to refrain from coming in between 11:30 and 1:30 p.m. And that's due to the commercial arrivals. So you just want to avoid that traffic.
Got it. Makes sense. So thank you, Christine. I actually have two questions that came in for you, Jason, if you're still available.
I'm still here.
All right. Well, let me put you on spotlight again. All right. So the first was about the new exemption for business travelers. Any insight there?
Yeah, so here in the UK, the government announced a couple of different options to shorten quarantine. The first is that you arrive, you go into quarantine, but then at the 5-day mark, you can take a PCR test from an approved PCR test supplier. And upon a negative result, you are then released from your self-isolation. If you get a positive test, of course, you will need to continue to self-isolate for the next 10 days. The second route is designed to allow business leaders, and those are businessmen that are coming in to either bring investment, which is going to create at least 50 new jobs, or that they are traveling to support 50 existing jobs here in the UK. It's a very simple process. You come with a letter on company headed paper with a few details, which we'll be able to share with you via Louis in the blog. And you then present that to the immigration officer on arrival, and you are then no longer required to self-isolate or quarantine. It is important to note, however, this would only apply to very senior executives of the company and wouldn't apply necessarily to everyone traveling in that group. So very careful, very important to get the details right there. But
Okay,
we do hope that is going to improve access to the UK for business leaders.
Perfect. So good notes there. And then I had someone reacting to the recent announcement about Universal Aviation now providing ground handling at Northolt in London. The customer particularly mentioned that in the past, it's been really hard to get into Northolt. And I know that this can be a more longer answer, but anything specific changing that you can address briefly?
Well, no, so for those that don't know, RAF Northolt is a military base in the northwest of London. It is where Her Majesty the Queen travels from. It's actually where Boris has traveled from this evening to head to Brussels. So it gives a very advantageous drive time into London. It has been quite difficult to get in there over the last couple of years because of more restricted hours. Universal Aviation takes over the running of the crew and passenger services from the 1st of January. The Air Force has already agreed to a small extension to the existing hours. So instead of closing at 1600, it will be extended to 1700. They're also hoping that they are going to be able to give further extensions by spring, April time. What we're ultimately pushing for is a return back to the original operating hours of 8 till 8 and open again at weekends. But small steps, but we will hopefully get there. But we're very excited about our new location. So we'll hope to see you there soon.
Great. So more news there. So thank you, Jason. All right. So I know, Louis, you have been very busy. I've seen a lot happening in the chat. So I assume you've got a couple of questions to share with our experts, see who we can put on the spot. So what's been at the top of your list?
Yeah, thanks, Annabelle. So let's jump back to Puerto Rico quickly. We had a question that came in. So Linda, can you tell us where can crews get timely PCR tests when they're in San Juan?
Yeah, we have a place is it calls CMT, so we can coordinate that whenever a crew member needs to have a test, so we can make the arrangement to do that for them.
Great, thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.
Christine, another question about the ski country restrictions. What about locals that live there when they're coming back from other destinations? Are they exempt?
So right now, the official statement stipulates that residents, either full or part-time, are not required to complete the affidavit or the testing, but it's highly recommended. That may change as this kind of evolves, but for right now, they're okay.
Excellent, thank you. Just going to throw this one out there to the group, whoever would like to answer. What steps are recommended when transporting COVID positive passengers? That's those that are exhibiting symptoms but not yet tested.
Actually, I'll chime in from our experiences here. So when you're coming into the UK, operators need to call ahead to confirm that everybody is still fit and healthy on board. If somebody has, however, declared symptoms, upon arrival, the aircraft door has to remain shut. You are then met by the fire service in full spaceman outfits, and that patient is then transferred to a COVID self-isolation holding area, waiting further examination. So it's a bit of a pain. We also handle here at Stansted a lot of medical emergency flights, and that includes patients that are being repatriated back to the UK and sometimes out of the UK, and they are transported in a Epi Shuttle, which is a $14,000 medical pod. And there's a lot of protocols around the crew and the staff and how we interact around that. But there's a lot of protocols in place to handle those situations.
I would echo what Jason said. What I'm finding from a lot of different locations is that countries are stating in those NOTAMs or those regulations that are put in place that if you have somebody on board that may be possibly COVID positive, they're wanting people to, or they're wanting crew to, as much as possible, stay away from that person. And of course, advise authorities prior to arrival. Some countries do have stipulated requirements. So you can check for those official websites, or of course you can give us a ring and we can search for those for you. Canada is a great example. They have a very clear guidance on what crew need to do.
Thanks, Christine. That actually leads into one of our questions. So what are some of those requirements for transporting an ill passenger from the US to Canada?
Well, they're wanting to have persons keep the distance as much as possible, both from crew and from other persons that are on the aircraft. They're recommending that everybody wear masks, ensure that normal PPE are worn by everyone. Of course, advise authorities. And there are some countries that are requesting that persons not eat or drink for 2 hours prior to arrival. So when they do testing upon arrival, that does not alter those potential results.
Thanks, Christine. You talked a little bit about masks. One of the questions we have is, what are we hearing about flight crews? Are they wearing or not wearing masks in the cockpit?
As far as the cockpit, I haven't heard, but because authorities are recommending that people maintain those, I would say that would be a recommendation. But of course, you guys are separated from the rest of the aircraft. But upon arrival, before opening the doors, many of these countries are going to require that you wear those masks before exiting the aircraft.
Thanks, Christine. Regarding California travel, we have a question about the recently noted 14-day quarantine. Does this apply to residents of California, or is it strictly for those traveling from outside the state?
My understanding is it applies to residents too, that they're very stringent on what's going to be required or not. It's still brand new, so I'd like to look a bit more into it, but it's something that people are going to have to take into consideration. My understanding is it also has to do with which county you're in and how far you can go if you leave your home.
Thank you. And now getting into some of the regional questions we have. Any updates on Panama or Suriname?
Not that I know of. Those locations seem to be pretty stable. So if they do have a potential trip coming up, I would recommend that you look into that. Panama, of course, you have to have a negative COVID test within 48 hours of arrival, and you will be subject to testing on arrival. They don't need the 14-day quarantine except for those that test positive. But if you're looking to go in there, we would definitely want to just make sure nothing's changed. For Suriname, both business and tourism is up for grabs. You just have to get permission from the Ministry of Health. And then testing upon arrival is required. Here, they do require 14-day quarantine at a government mandated facility or hotel for the passengers, not necessarily for the crew. So that's something to consider for anybody looking to go in there.
Great, thank you. Linda, going back to Puerto Rico again, we had a further question regarding the PCR testing. Is the PCR test for crew at CMT in Puerto Rico, can passengers also get PCR tests there?
No. If they bring the COVID test with negative results and they have to fill out the questionnaire, which is online, they don't require to have a COVID test upon arrival. They don't.
Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.
Annabelle, I'm thinking that's all I'm seeing. That's all the questions I'm seeing, unless anything else has come in.
All right,
Anybody has any last minute?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Liz. I have one more that I think I skipped over when I was going through my list that had come in. Christine, any new requirements to go into the USA from excluding countries like Brazil and the UK?
So as of right now, that regulation still remains in effect. The U.S. proclamation, the restricted countries, also known as the suspended regions and/or countries, remain the same. Nothing's changed. So we're going to have to see if that eases in the near future. But for right now, people need to keep that in mind for any travel into the U.S. One thing I guess people can consider is if they're going to look to make a tech stop, they can look very closely at what those suspended regions are. So the Schengen zone is on the suspended region, but not some of those EU countries because they're not members. So countries like Croatia would allow you to make a tech stop and go and not be suspended because it's not in that grouping. So just look at those details.
All right, so as usual, the details definitely matter. All right. Thank you, Christine, and thank you to all of our guests. We did cover a lot today and a lot of ranging of topics and a lot of regions. So thanks to all for your preparation and for sharing. So as I mentioned before, for all of you joining us, this is our last webinar meetup for 2020. And these last few weeks of the year are indeed a great time to send in your suggestions for what you want us to cover in 2021. So Louis, if you wouldn't mind dropping in that email to the chat, it's operationalinsight@univway.com. That'll come to me and it'll let me know what's on your mind that we could start or we could plan to cover in the new year. So let's get that up for you. And then on behalf of the entire Universal family, I hope you enjoy a wonderful holiday season. Please stay healthy. Have a prosperous beginning to your new year. And I do appreciate your support with this program. We definitely hope to see you again in January. So thanks again to our special guests and enjoy the rest of the season. Take care. Bye-bye. So good to have you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Happy holidays.
Bye.